freedom lies, the streets are fields that never die. Deliver me from reasons why you'd rather cry, I'd rather fly.
I'd like to address one other point relating to electoral reform and how government makes decisions under each system. I'd urge this committee to view the results of elections that use electoral systems other than the system we currently have, the single-member plurality system. Australia, for example, uses the alternative vote, and the results there have consistently been, with the odd exception, that coalition governments are formed, not majority governments. The same can be found with the single transferable vote in Ireland. And of course, in those countries that use list PR, again, majority governments are the exception, not the rule. If Ontario moves from the current system to almost any other system, majority governments will become much more rare. Therefore, in endorsing one electoral system over another, I would encourage the committee to give deep consideration to the implications of majority versus minority government. That, ultimately, is the most powerful effect that any electoral reform will have. In a majority government, the party in power has the opportunity to govern by doing what it is right, what it believes is right, even when it's unpopular for it to do so. In a minority or coalition government, the process is almost entirely different. The issue is not one of right and wrong, but of compromise and negotiation. Now, on its face, that sounds very friendly and up with people. But in reality, the difference between majority government and minority or coalition government is dramatic. Specifically, when we replace majority government with minority or coalition governments, we move from a system that accommodates ethical decision-making to a system based on the rejection of ethics and the substitution of whims and numbers, ballot counting. We move, or hand counting if you're talking about the legislature. We move from a government guided by reason to one guided by emotion. One guided not by what's right, but simply what you want. I'd urge the committee to consider the words of author-philosopher Ayn Rand, who wrote in 1965, quote, "If some demagogue were to offer us as a guiding creed the following tenets, that statistics should be substituted for truth, vote counting for principles, numbers for rights, and public polls for morality, that pragmatic range of the moment political expediency should be the criterion of a country's interests, and that the number of its adherents should be the criterion of an idea's truth or falsehood, that any desire of any nature whatsoever should be accepted as a valid claim, provided it is held by a sufficient number of people, that a majority may do anything it pleases to a minority. In short, gang rule and mob rule. If a demagogue were to offer it, he would not get very far. Yet all of that is contained in and camouflaged by the notion of government by consensus." Ms. Rand's point applies with equal force to electoral reform. Only majority government can facilitate, it is the only one capable of facilitating government decision-making on the basis of ethical considerations as opposed to numerical ones. A minority or coalition government simply cannot do so. All negotiations on matters of right and wrong are by their very nature clashes of implicit or explicit ethical codes. Therefore, to the extent that opposing negotiators have both compromised their stance on an important matter of government policy, they have both acted contrary to their own ethical codes. In closing, I would urge the committee, in making its report, to be cognizant of the fact that it is not truly dealing with the issue of democracy. It is dealing with the issue of right versus might, with the issue of ethical rule versus majority rule, with the issue of individual freedom versus tyranny of majorities. If we are to protect democracy, we can do nothing more important than ensure that ethical limits be placed on government authority. Those limits, I submit, are facilitated only by an electoral system that makes majority governments the rule rather than the exception. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. McKeever. You certainly provided to us your 15 minutes of interesting discussion. I thank you very much for your input. Unfortunately, we don't have time for question and answers at this point in time because the time has has expired. But I thank you very much for your input, and very valuable input that we'll certainly consider in our deliberations. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
They got the guns, but we got the numbers. Gonna win, yeah, we're taking